In the grand tapestry of life, every creature, no matter how small, plays a role. Yet in the middle of the 20th century, one of the world's oldest civilizations declared war on a tiny, seemingly insignificant bird. This was China in 1958, a nation in the grip of monumental change. The leader of this vast country, Mao Zedong, launched a bold and ambitious plan known as the Great Leap Forward. His goal was to transform China from a rural agrarian society into a modern industrial powerhouse, seemingly overnight. To achieve this, every resource had to be marshaled, and every obstacle, real or perceived, had to be eliminated. It was a time of immense political fervor and social engineering on a scale rarely seen in human history. Central to this grand vision was the idea of conquering nature itself, bending it to the will of the state. As part of the Great Leap Forward, Mao initiated the Four Pests Campaign, a directive aimed at wiping out 4 specific creatures deemed detrimental to the nation's progress. These were media group, rats in urban environments, vintage photos of rats being hunted or caught in China added stock at distribute_equally rats, which spread disease, flies, which were carriers of germs, mosquitoes, which transmitted malaria, and most fatefully, the Eurasian tree sparrow. The logic seemed simple and direct. Sparrows were accused of being thieves of the people's grain, eating the seeds that were meant to feed a burgeoning population. Scientists of the time estimated that each sparrow consumed several kilograms of grain per year, a calculation that, when multiplied by the millions of sparrows, painted them as a significant drain on the nation's food supply. The campaign against the sparrows was therefore framed not just as a practical measure for food security, but as a patriotic duty. It was a battle for every kernel of rice, every grain of wheat. To Mao and the Communist Party leadership, the sparrow was a symbol of the old, inefficient world that needed to be swept away. Killing them was presented as an act of revolutionary zeal, a way for every citizen, from the farmer in the field to the child in the schoolyard, to contribute directly to the building of a new, prosperous China. The idea was powerful and easy to grasp. More sparrows meant less grain, and less grain meant a weaker nation. The declaration of war was made, and the tiny bird became public enemy number 1. This decision, however, was born of a profound misunderstanding of the natural world. It was a policy based on a narrow and incomplete view of an ecosystem, focusing only on one aspect of a creature's behavior, while ignoring all others. The sparrow does indeed eat grain, particularly during harvest time, but this is only a fraction of its diet. What was tragically overlooked was the sparrow's immense appetite for insects, many of which are serious agricultural pests. In the rush to create a modern utopia, this crucial detail was dismissed as unimportant. The stage was set for an ecological catastrophe, one that would demonstrate with devastating clarity the dangers of waging war on nature without understanding its intricate connections. Once the command was given, the campaign against the sparrows was unleashed with astonishing force and coordination. The state's propaganda machine went into overdrive, using every available medium to rally the population. Colorful posters depicted heroic citizens, young and old, engaged in the noble struggle against the 4 pests. Newspapers ran headlines celebrating the latest kill counts, turning the eradication into a national competition. Radio broadcasts filled the airwaves with revolutionary songs and impassioned speeches, urging everyone to do their part. The message was relentless and unavoidable. To be a good citizen was to be a sparrow killer. This was not just a government policy, it was transformed into a people's war. The mobilization was total. Schools were closed so that children could join the hunt, their small hands armed with slingshots or banging pots and pans. Factory workers and office clerks were organized into extermination teams, leaving their usual posts to patrol the streets and fields. In the cities, residents climbed onto rooftops, waving flags and beating drums to prevent the terrified birds from finding a place to land. The campaign became a spectacle of mass participation, a public ritual that bound the community together in a shared and ultimately destructive purpose. It was a powerful display of the state's ability to direct the collective energy of hundreds of millions of people towards a single focused goal, no matter how misguided. This nationwide effort was fueled by a sense of revolutionary fervor. Killing sparrows was equated with patriotism and loyalty to the chairman. People who questioned the wisdom of the campaign risked being labeled as counter-revolutionaries or sympathizers with the old ways. The social pressure to participate was immense. Competitions were held between villages, factories, and schools to see who could present the largest pile of dead sparrows. These grim trophies were then proudly displayed as proof of one's dedication to the cause. The campaign took on a life of its own, driven by a combination of genuine belief, social pressure, and fear of being seen as uncooperative with the state's grand vision. The result was a war of attrition waged by an entire nation against a single species. The skies, once filled with the cheerful chirping of sparrows, grew unnervingly quiet. For a brief moment it seemed like a victory. The grain thieves were being eliminated, and the people had demonstrated their power to reshape their environment according to their will. But this apparent triumph was hollow. The collective effort, so impressive in its scale and execution, was based on a flawed premise. The Chinese people had been mobilized to fight the wrong enemy, and the true cost of this nationwide mobilization was yet to be revealed, waiting silently in the fields and farmlands across the country. The methods employed in this war against the sparrows were as varied as they were ruthless, showcasing a chilling level of human ingenuity directed towards destruction. The most common tactic was one of sheer exhaustion. Recognizing that sparrows could not fly for extended periods without rest, people were organized to create a constant cacophony. Day and night citizens would bang on pots, pans, wash basins, and drums. They would shout, wave flags and cloths from rooftops and poles, and set off firecrackers. The goal was to create a world with no sanctuary for the birds. Terrified and relentlessly pursued, the sparrows would fly until their small bodies gave out, dropping from the sky from pure exhaustion. Another widespread method involved the systematic destruction of their homes and future generations. Teams of people, including school children, were tasked with finding and destroying sparrow nests. They would climb trees, scour the eaves of buildings, and poke into any nook or cranny where a nest might be hidden. Eggs were smashed on sight, and helpless chicks were killed without a second thought. This approach was designed to cripple the sparrow population from the ground up, ensuring that even if some adult birds survived the initial onslaught, there would be no new generation to replace them. It was a brutal, systematic effort to erase the species from the landscape entirely. Direct killing was also common. Citizens used a variety of tools to hunt the birds down. Slingshots were a popular weapon, especially among the youth. People also set up nets to catch them in flight, or as they tried to roost. In some areas, poison bait was left out, a method that indiscriminately killed not only sparrows, but potentially other birds and animals as well. The scale of the slaughter was staggering. Official statistics, often celebrated in the state-run media, reported that hundreds of millions of sparrows had been killed in the first year of the campaign alone. The sheer efficiency of this mass mobilization was a testament to the power of a unified, state-directed effort. This relentless hunt transformed the relationship between people and the birds they had lived alongside for centuries. What was once a common sight, a familiar part of the daily soundscape of both city and countryside, became a target. The cheerful chirping that had marked the start and end of each day was replaced by the clang of metal and the shouts of the hunt. The campaign effectively weaponized the entire population, turning ordinary citizens into an army of exterminators. The methods were brutal, the effort was total, and the immediate result was the near-complete disappearance of the Eurasian tree sparrow from the skies of China. By 1960, the war on sparrows appeared to be a resounding success. The birds had been virtually eliminated from vast regions of China. The government celebrated this as a major victory in the Great Leap Forward, a triumph of human will over the pests of nature. For a short while, grain harvests did seem to improve slightly, reinforcing the belief that the campaign had been justified. But this sense of accomplishment was tragically short-lived. Nature, as it so often does, was about to reveal a fundamental truth that had been ignored. Every part of an ecosystem is connected, and removing one piece can cause the entire structure to collapse. The real consequences of the sparrow's absence were about to unfold with devastating force. The primary role that had been overlooked was the sparrow's function as a predator. While they did eat grain, a significant portion of their diet consisted of insects. In particular, they were voracious consumers of locusts, beetles, and other agricultural pests. With their main natural predator gone, these insect populations began to explode. Locust swarms, once kept in check by the millions of hungry sparrows, now multiplied at an alarming rate. They descended upon the fields in biblical plagues, devouring everything in their path. The very grain that the campaign was meant to protect was now being consumed on an unimaginable scale by an enemy far more destructive than the sparrows ever were. The ecological imbalance created a vicious cycle. The more the insect populations grew, the more crops they destroyed. Farmers who had diligently participated in killing sparrows now watched in horror as their fields were stripped bare by caterpillars and locusts. The small amount of grain supposedly saved from the sparrows was dwarfed by the catastrophic losses inflicted by the unchecked insect pests. This ecological disaster coincided with other disastrous agricultural policies of the Great Leap Forward and a period of unfavorable weather conditions. The combination proved to be lethal, contributing directly to the Great Chinese Famine, one of the deadliest famines in human history. The irony was both cruel and profound. In an attempt to secure its food supply, the Chinese government had inadvertently unleashed a far greater threat to its harvests. The war on sparrows did not lead to prosperity, it led to starvation. It served as a horrifying real-world experiment demonstrating the critical importance of biodiversity and the role of predators in maintaining a healthy environment. The silence in the skies, once hailed as a sign of victory, became an ominous symbol of a deep and tragic miscalculation. The nation had won its declared war, but in doing so, it had lost a far more important battle for survival and ecological stability. By early 1960, the catastrophic consequences of the anti-sparrow campaign were becoming undeniable, even to the most ardent supporters of the policy. Reports from across the country painted a grim picture of locust plagues and decimated crops. A few brave scientists who had been silenced or ignored at the outset began to speak up again, armed with irrefutable evidence of the ecological disaster. One prominent ornithologist, So-Shin Cheng, presented research showing that while sparrows did eat grain, their primary diet, especially when feeding their young, consisted of harmful insects. The benefit they provided as pest controllers, he argued, far outweighed the damage they caused to crops. Faced with mounting evidence and a deepening agricultural crisis, the leadership in Beijing was forced to reconsider. In a remarkable turnaround, Mao Zedong himself conceded that the policy had been a mistake. The order to exterminate sparrows was abruptly halted. The campaign, which had been waged with such revolutionary fervor just 2 years earlier, was officially called off. The sparrow was quietly removed from the list of the four pests. Its place was taken by a new, less ecologically significant enemy, the bedbug. The propaganda machine that had so effectively demonized the sparrow fell silent on the matter, and the focus of the people's war shifted. However, reversing the policy was far easier than reversing the damage. The sparrow population had been decimated to a point where it could not recover on its own. The ecological balance had been shattered, and the insect populations continued to run rampant without their natural predator. In a move that highlighted the sheer desperation of the situation, the Chinese government undertook an extraordinary new campaign. They began to import sparrows from the neighboring Soviet Union. Shiploads and planeloads of birds were brought into China and released into the countryside in an attempt to repopulate the species and restore some semblance of ecological order. This dramatic reversal serves as a powerful testament to the severity of the crisis. The same state that had mobilized millions to kill sparrows was now spending resources to bring them back. It was a humbling admission of failure, a recognition that the initial policy had been based on a profound and dangerous ignorance of ecological principles. The effort to reintroduce sparrows was a slow and arduous process. It would take many years for the bird populations to recover and for the natural balance to be partially restored. The Great Reversal was a painful but necessary step, a lesson learned at an almost unimaginable cost in human lives and environmental devastation. The story of China's war on sparrows offers profound lessons that resonate far beyond its time and place. Perhaps the most critical lesson is the danger of ignoring scientific knowledge in the pursuit of political or economic goals. The decision to eradicate the sparrows was not based on a comprehensive ecological study, but on a simplistic and flawed calculation. Scientists who understood the complexities of the food web were either not consulted or their warnings were dismissed. This tragedy underscores the vital importance of basing environmental policy on sound, impartial science rather than on ideology or short-term thinking. Nature is an intricate system, and acting without understanding its rules can lead to consequences that are both unintended and catastrophic. Another key lesson concerns the value of biodiversity. The campaign was rooted in the idea that a species could be labeled simply as good or bad. The sparrow was condemned as a pest, a thief of grain without any appreciation for its beneficial role as an insectivore. This black and white thinking fails to recognize that every species, even those we might consider inconvenient, contributes to the health and stability of its ecosystem. The removal of the sparrow created a vacuum that was quickly filled by an explosion of real pests, demonstrating that biodiversity is not a luxury, but a necessity for a resilient and productive environment. It teaches us that a world with fewer species is a poorer and more vulnerable world. Furthermore, the saga highlights the immense power and potential peril of mass mobilization. The Chinese government demonstrated an incredible ability to direct the actions of its people towards a common goal. This power can be used for great good, but when directed by a flawed premise, it can amplify a mistake to a devastating scale. The Sparrow campaign became a tragedy precisely because it was so successful. Millions of people acting with shared purpose efficiently executed a disastrous plan. This serves as a cautionary tale about the responsibility that comes with leadership and the need for critical thinking and humility, especially when dealing with complex systems like the environment. Ultimately, the story is a powerful reminder of the concept of ecological blowback, where a human intervention in nature backfires and creates a worse problem than the one it was intended to solve. It is an echo of the warnings found in Rachel Carson's seminal book, Silent Spring, which exposed the dangers of indiscriminate pesticide use. The silence that fell over the Chinese countryside after the sparrows were gone was a literal silent spring, a stark auditory signal of a broken ecosystem. The lesson is clear and timeless. Humanity is a part of nature, not its master. We tamper with its intricate web of life at our own peril. The tragic war on sparrows in China is not an isolated incident in the story of human interaction with the natural world. It is, in fact, a particularly stark example of a recurring pattern of ecological miscalculation driven by human hubris. Throughout history and across the globe, we can find similar stories of well-intentioned interventions that have had disastrous, unforeseen consequences. These events share a common thread: a failure to appreciate the complexity of ecosystems, and an overconfidence in our ability to control and manipulate nature for our own benefit. It is a pattern born from viewing the environment as a simple machine rather than a living, interconnected system. Consider, for example, the introduction of the cane toad to Australia in the 1930s. The toads were brought in to control the cane beetle, which was damaging sugarcane plantations. The logic seemed sound, much like the logic for eliminating sparrows. However, the toads proved to be a far greater ecological disaster than the beetles they were meant to control. They were toxic to native predators, outcompeted native amphibians, and their population exploded, spreading across the continent. The cane toads had little impact on the cane beetles but caused immense damage to Australia's unique wildlife, a problem that persists to this day. Another parallel can be seen in the campaign to eradicate predators like wolves from large parts of North America. For many years, wolves were seen as a threat to livestock and a competitor for game animals like deer and elk. A systematic effort was made to hunt, trap, and poison them into local extinction. The result, particularly in places like Yellowstone National Park, was a cascade of ecological changes. Without wolves, the elk population boomed, leading to overgrazing of vegetation, which in turn caused riverbanks to erode and beaver populations to decline. The reintroduction of wolves to Yellowstone decades later famously demonstrated how a single keystone predator could restore balance to an entire ecosystem. These examples, from Australian toads to American wolves, tell the same fundamental story as the Chinese sparrows. They reveal a dangerous tendency to simplify complex ecological relationships into a narrative of heroes and villains, pests and protectors. This approach consistently fails because nature does not operate in such simple terms. Every species is part of a dynamic and intricate web of dependencies. Pulling on a single thread, whether by removing a native species or introducing a new one, can cause ripples that unravel the entire fabric in ways we could never predict. These historical blunders are not just footnotes in history, they are urgent warnings for our present and future. In conclusion, the story of China's misguided war on the sparrow stands as one of the most poignant and powerful environmental parables of the modern age. It is a humbling reminder of the limits of human knowledge and the profound dangers of acting with arrogance towards the natural world. The campaign, born from a desire for control and progress, ultimately delivered chaos and famine. It showed with devastating clarity that an ecosystem is not a collection of independent parts that can be added or removed at will, but a delicate, intricate system where every component, even the humble sparrow, has a vital role to play in maintaining balance. The primary lesson we must carry forward is the necessity of humility in our environmental stewardship. The architects of the Great Leap Forward believed they could command nature as they commanded their people, redesigning the landscape to fit their vision of utopia. They learned, at a terrible cost, that nature follows its own laws, which cannot be repealed by political decree. Today, as we face even greater environmental challenges like climate change and mass extinction, this lesson is more relevant than ever. We must approach our planet not as conquerors, but as custodians, with a deep respect for the complexity that we are only beginning to understand. This requires a steadfast commitment to scientific understanding. The tragedy could have been averted if the voices of ornithologists and ecologists had been heeded. Science provides us with the tools to look beyond the obvious, to see the hidden connections and potential consequences of our actions. In an era of misinformation and politically motivated science denial, the tale of the sparrows is a stark warning against ignoring expert consensus. Environmental policy must be guided by the best available evidence, not by wishful thinking or political expediency. The cost of ignorance, as the Great Chinese Famine demonstrated, can be measured in human lives. Ultimately, the silent skies over China in 1960 are a monument to a profound mistake. But they also offer a chance for redemption through learning. The story compels us to look at the world with greater wisdom and care, to recognize the value in every creature, and to appreciate the fragile balance that sustains all life, including our own. It teaches us that our own survival is inextricably linked to the health of the planet's ecosystems. When we wage war on nature, we are, in the end, waging war on ourselves. The chirping of a sparrow is not just a pleasant sound, it is a sign of a world in balance, a world we must strive to protect.